right, I think we're going to go with this. Does this work for everybody? Cool. So, hello, good morning. My name is Jessica Sachs. I've been programming professionally for 8 years, and I am one of the maintainers on the new Vue Test Utils team. I am a tech lead at a company called Intent. We're based out of NYC, but I work remotely in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And outside of programming, I play a lot of StarCraft, StarCraft 2, and watch baseball. I'm a Yankees fan, living in Boston, which if you're local to US, you'll get that. And then I practice trapeze for circus, which is a lot of really weird hobbies. So let's start by asking, let's do the group raise your hands thing. Who here knows what automated testing is? Yeah. Our forefathers worked very hard for this. Have ever written a unit test? I'm going to make you keep your hands up so you don't have to keep doing the thing. Have ever tested a Vue component? Great. And do you know what Vue Test Utils is? Okay. I hope that was the same number of people that said they have ever unit tested a Vue component, because you've used it. Cool. So let's get into it. The agenda, what we're going to be talking about today is we are going to define Vue Test Utils for everybody who didn't have their hand up when I asked. I'm going to introduce the new maintainers team and how we are making decisions about what goes in the API and what does not. And then we'll finally talk about Vue 3 and the Vue Test Utils V1 release. Vue Test Utils is still in beta, even though it's used everywhere for testing Vue components. And finally, I'll go through kind of a case study of how we're applying our guiding principles to shallow mount versus mount, which has a lot of implications. Cool. So defining what Vue Test Utils is. It's basically just a library of functions, and its purpose is to help users test their components and mount them in a clean way so that you don't get a lot of state overlap. You can just trust that everything is clean every time. It's an intuitive way to get a nice test going that you can trust. Great. So basically, the line that everybody should recognize that's used it is line 6. It's the most basic usage of mounting your test component. And then line 7 is going to be using one of the few kind of matchers that Vue Test Utils provides, which is if it exists, which is did it throw an error when it compiled? Was there a problem? Did you do it right? That's the basic thing there. You could think of it as the equivalent to like document append child. Did it appear in the DOM without an error? Cool. So it has a few other responsibilities. So we already went over lines 1 and 2, which are mount and shallow mount, or pretend we went over shallow mount. We'll go over it deeper later. And then finding. So there's both a find and a find all, which return wrappers and wrapper arrays and allow you to, they're basically, for recovering jQuery developers, they're basically jQuery wrapped wrappers. You can think of it like that. That also have like extended methods on them that allow you to do things like trigger or, again, check if it exists. Read the docs, there's a lot more. But those are the 4 kind of areas. It's like mount the thing, find the thing, and then act on it like you were a user. Cool. And so what is the wrapper exactly? It's kind of an abstraction. And a pro tip is if you can't get what you want on the API, you can always just drop down to the Vue instance and use any publicly defined API method on the Vue instance by using .vm. And if you're feeling really, I don't know, nostalgic, don't do this. But sometimes you're in a pinch and you have to do the thing you don't want to do. You can always drop down to vm.$el and use any DOM assertion library you want in your jest tests. So you always have some flexibility when you can drop down to a lower level. Cool. So I mentioned that you have some expectations that you can get at. I've only talked about exists because it's the most basic thing. But there are other libraries that are building on top of Vue Test Utils. For example, the Vue testing library. And it has a really intuitive, super intuitive if you've used Selenium, which I unfortunately have. And super intuitive API where you can render, which is the same as mount, and then you can unpack some helper functions, like on line 6 and 7, you can see that you can now use the getByText selector or function. And then it works just how you expect it. You're going to try to get an element with the text of times clicked 0. And then not highlighted, but also hopefully visible? No, definitely not visible. Never mind. You can also get at lines 11, which is an example of how to fire an event. Yeah. The TLDR with Vue Testing Library is it provides a really nice syntax on top of Vue Test Utils and allows you to write cleaner tests. So you should use it. They're not competing. It's built on top of, and you can view Vue Test Utils as an underlying lower level library that you should extend. Cool. So does everybody feel like they understand Vue Test Utils a little better? People who didn't have their hands up when I said what it is. Yes? Raise your hands. Cool. Awesome. So, new maintainers. So the previous maintainer, Ed, worked on Vue Test Utils for years and got it to where it is today, which is used by everybody who wants to unit test their Vue components, which is pretty cool. So the code base has been aging for the last year, and we needed to add additional engineers to pay off tech debt that was on our credit card. So we did. And when we added our engineers, our priorities were to close issues, because there were a mounting amount of issues on the project. I think it was like 100 when we came on. There were 100 issues that were open. I think like 26 pull requests. And so over the last 6 weeks, I'm really proud of this GIF, by the way. I really love this GIF. Giphy has really improved our presentation GIF game overall as an industry. So we've closed 66 issues in 6 weeks, including the holidays, and including ramping up all of the engineers that we added. So like, we're dropped into a code base. Some of us had been contributors before, but just contributors. So we weren't really making architecture decisions. And so now we're ramping up on the goals of Vue.to, and then helping to maintain the whole community surrounding it, and that is closing issues, accepting and debugging pull requests, and validating that they are working, and then also architecting the future plans for what we have to do to work with Vue 3 and what V1 needs to encompass. So there was a lot of discussion early on if we should just fix a lot of bugs and then release V1, or if we should wait till we integrate with Vue Next and see if we should release V1 then. So that was kind of a back and forth discussion when we first came on. Cool. So who are we? Who are these engineers? Is me. I am outside of VTU. I contribute to Vue Style Guidist. I have a huge passion for design systems, as well as those Shibas that Diva was presenting. Those were really cute dogs, and I have to go back and show them off to my team. But I'm also a Vue Vixen, and I'm a moderator on the Vue Discord. So if you ever want to talk to me, you can just go on Discord, and I will be there. And then we have Lachlan. He's the author of the Vue Testing Handbook, and they have over 1 million views last year on Vue testing, which I thought was huge. He's in Brisbane. So then we also have Dobromir, who's a contributor to Vuelidate. A lot of people have probably used Vuelidate. A longtime community leader, also very present in Discord, and the author of the Vue Community Guide. Lastly, we have Adria, who works on the Vue testing library that I mentioned earlier. So we have good sync across both of those projects, with him working on Vue testing library and telling us what he would love to see out of our lower level API. He's the Vue.js Barcelona organizer. He's here, so if you see him, find him and talk to him about testing. Cool. So that's who we are, and so now I'd like to talk about Vue 3 and the V1 release of VTU. VTU is Vue Test Utils for short. It gets a little bit laboring saying Vue Test Utils. So in short, don't worry, we're going to support everybody. But we will really try to document and help people migrate is really it. People will follow instructions if you give them in a concise way. So all you have to do is really make sure your documentation is bulletproof and go over all the edge cases. At my work, I work on a 12-year-old legacy system. I sound pained when I'm saying that. I work on a 12-year-old legacy system that is using Vue 2, and it's going to be quite an effort to use Vue 3 at the same time. Like I can already hear my coworkers saying, Jess, how do we do it? And then also cutting our test framework over. Are we going to have it split? What are we going to do? So that is really our number one priority, is answering those questions for people so that they don't feel nervous or lost, and that they have docs to go to. We plan to make the upgrade incremental because, again, you can't expect a large code base to be able to cut over like that. GitLab has like 16,000 unit tests or something like that. Yeah, I was talking with Natalia about it. We have a lot of conversations about how GitLab unit tests with Vue Test Utils because they have 16,000 unit tests. So we're really trying to make sure that a cutover is feasible and, easy. Cool. So Evan talked about this early on about how the Vue 2.x code base was written in Flow. VTU is also in Flow. We want to be in sync with the rest of the Vue ecosystem with better developer experience and IDE support for types. That's just a no-brainer. And we would also like, in version 1 and kind of 2020 in general, we would like to use community projects to integration test how VTU is doing. This will also help us shake out some of those migration issues. If there are ever breaking changes, we would like to kind of try it out on GitLab or on Vuetify and try to help them, if necessary, migrate stuff so we can write better docs. But what I'm really seeing as a path forward or as a strategy forward is to build a test application, kind of like a little bit bigger than a to-do app, with certain third-party component libraries that you see when you type in Vue create and it gives you options. We should at least have kind of an integration test with each one of those popular component libraries. And we want to, on each build, figure out if we're breaking anything with our fake application. So very high-level testing. And we want to try to reduce the number of GitHub issues reported with third-party component libraries. That is our #1 complaint from users, is a lack of documentation. I'll get into this in a second, about how to use third-party component libraries. And Vuetify is doing a lot of work, actually, on providing documentation with their unit testing framework. I'm sure John will talk about that at some point. John Leader. Cool. So, yeah, better documentation. So, my biggest beef with the Vue Test Utils docs, if anybody's read through the Vue Test Utils docs, it lacks the clarity that Vue docs are known for. Like, it just doesn't feel linear. You have to kind of hunt through the guide to get to things that should have been explained in the API. And it's really messy. When I had to train my own teams on it, that was a huge complaint from them as well. And I think a lot of our changes that we need to do aren't code changes, they're just writing better docs. So our plan as maintainers is really how do we teach people through writing documentation and providing guides, how to write their unit tests effectively. That's really it boiled down to one line. One of the other things that we need to do is we need to provide good real-world examples of how to use I18N and other plugins. I know we have a section on Vue Router and Vuex, but I still get a lot of questions in Discord about how to do it. So clearly the documentation is not sufficient because they've read through it, and they still come back to Discord looking for one-on-one help. And if people are on Discord doing it, they're sure as heck, I said heck, I never say heck. They're sure as heck going to your tech lead, your local tech lead, and trying to ask you the same thing. And so we want to reduce that back and forth and just be able to send people to the docs, have them learn one time, and then that will be less back and forth, really. So, cool. I set it up there. You can read it probably, but if you know the good-bad section of the Vue docs, I think that's wonderful. Our spec, if anybody is a Ruby nerd or has looked through our spec, or Jasmine, which copied our spec, you'll see good-bad, and that is really cool. It provides an example of how you should do things versus how you should not do things. And people often come to chats and ask for what is the best practice for how to do something, and I want to be able to point them to one place. Awesome possum. So I do say awesome possum, though. I don't say heck, I do say awesome possum. So guiding principles. So because we have a new team now, we have to also define a framework of principles to help us manage the issues and pull requests that we're receiving. We can't just say yes and no to things without reasons. Or we could, but that would be bad management. So we have to define first what Vue Test Utils is and is not. This is what we came up with, and I'll go through each one of them in the next few slides. So this is basically a copy of the slide from earlier. We want to provide a way to mount and test Vue components. That is it. We are not a matchers library. We don't want to fill the hole that Vue testing library is doing by providing nice semantic matchers and selectors. That is not what Vue Test Utils is about. So we do want a lean core and an extensible platform. So we're considering a pluggable kind of an architecture. This is one of Dobromir's ideas. We want to enable people to build on top of VTU. We get a lot of GitHub issues saying we want to be able to I don't know, reset emitted or have this feature or that feature. And it would be really simple to implement in V2U, but it would clutter the API and kind of blur the line of what its responsibilities are. Most important for a testing framework, in my opinion, is a production-like API and environment. I really have a beef with set props. So we do some really weird stuff to make set props work. And well, it's probably going to have a deep review in the future. What do I mean? I think, for example, to make set props work, we have to manually retrigger some watchers that set props might be using, which has a lot of bugs with set immediate watchers. That is the tip of the iceberg of issues with set props. So something needs to be production-like, because if the test code you're running deviates from the production code that you're running, you might think you're covered, but you're not. Maybe you were requiring that first immediate watcher to run, or you had some state that wasn't set, and that first immediate watcher actually fails the first run through. You would release your code if you didn't test it manually, and then you would break something even though you wrote a test for it. So being production-like is incredibly important to us as a maintainer group. Again, we want to outline potential pitfalls of using set methods, set data, and set props in our documentation, because we don't want to remove them immediately or without good reason. This is the last section. I said that we had a talk about shallow mount versus mount. We basically we don't want to deprecate shallow mount. It has a lot of benefits. For everybody who's new to V2U, mount will render your entire component tree, and shallow mount will only mount, in our first example, that hello world component, but maybe none of its children components. And so we want to move shallow mount out of the spotlight because it's not intuitive to users. We get a ton of issues where your root component is a V container or something, and then everything inside of that is the business logic you want to test. But because shallow mount is so much faster, you're copy-pasting shallow mount, and then you come and you say, hey, why isn't it working? And we have to educate users about the pitfall and the power of shallow mount versus mount. So we're considering moving the API into an object, just like I wrote up there. Obviously not final. We're just in the exploratory phase of what should happen with that. But we get a lot of issues, so clearly there's a problem. This image, I had my coworker, right? He's a skier and loves unit testing, but hates shallow mount. So he wrote that up, or he drew that last week for me. So that's it. For getting involved, we're probably going to start posting RFCs to have these discussions more openly than just in Discord. And please come to the VueLand Discord if you have any questions or have any ideas. For getting help, I would say if you have a specific error that's throwing like a stack trace, obviously put it in GitHub issues. But if you have something kind of soft that you want to work through, please come to the Discord, and you can reliably get help. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was very informative, very good talk.